So this, I'm gonna do a book review, 2 book reviews, and see how it goes. Why out here? Just, I assume it's gonna be more interesting for you than having to look at the interior of my messy garage or my old wrinkled face. So here we go. First book review by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, and it relates back to communitarianism that I talked about a while back. And so communitarianism is all about trust, a lubricant for capitalism, the rule of law, democracy, and those elements of socialism that we think it's necessary, like health, education, national defense, and filling in potholes in the road. So yeah, Robert Putnam wrote this book about community, and he studied northern Italy and southern Italy. Northern Italy is economically much more prosperous than southern Italy, and he noticed that it also had, you know, a lot more soccer clubs and choral societies, and you know, other things that get people together and talk and chit chat and whatnot. Those are the 2 things he mentioned: soccer clubs and choral societies. So he was wondering, does northern Italy have soccer clubs and choral societies because it's relatively prosperous, or is it relatively prosperous because it has soccer clubs and choral societies? And he found out it was the latter. So community helps with economic growth. So it's an excellent book. I fully endorse it. Second book, The Rise and Fall of American Growth by Robert Gordon. And again, this is about economic growth or lack of growth, and he was looking mainly at the United States this time, from 1870 to 2016, which is when the book was written or published. And so he found that growth was just very stable from about 1870 to 1970. Actually, the first few decades from late 1800s, early 1900s, growth was amazing, and that's because of simple things like indoor plumbing and you know, electricity and whatnot, and even real simple things like mosquito netting. Like in the old days, before mosquito netting existed, you'd have houseflies traipsing back and forth between the outhouse shitter and the kitchen table, and you know, all sorts of diseases. And you know, back then the infant mortality rate was 15%, so you had a 15% chance of dying before you reached your first birthday. So, and you know, he looked at all sorts of things, like you know, before the automobile was invented, horses took people everywhere, and of course you know, you got horse crap in the streets and dead horse carcasses in the streets, and Robert Gordon even comes up with statistics, you know, how many tons of horse crap per square meter per day they had to get rid of in the average big city. And very interesting book. I'll show you a sample index pages just to show you how some of the interesting stuff he talked about. But after about 1970, growth really slowed down. There was a bit of a growth spurt from 1994 to 2004 with the computer revolution and businesses using computers. But after that, things petered out again. I guess it's too bad you didn't. The book ended in 2016. Because interesting to get some stats on growth and if they could be correlated to things like social media, which has its obvious pluses and minuses. So yeah, if you look at in the early days, it's very simple stuff like mosquito netting was able to increase economic growth because people were getting sick all the time. But after 1970, it was harder to find the real cheap fixes, the real low-hanging fruit. So Gordon looked at he calls them the four, not impediments, the four headwinds. That was the word. Four headwinds that work against economic growth these days. And the acronym is DIED, D-I-E-D. And I just gotta turn around here a bit, so hang on. And I gotta do I don't have a reverse on this thing, so I have to do what they call a wheelchair reverse. Maybe not. Where are we gonna go? Come on. Come on. No. Wheelchair it is. There we go. Oh, whoops. Come on. Come on. And yeah, getting back to that acronym DIED. I'll tackle the first of the two D's first. First D, demographics, is the first headwind working against growth, and he's referring mainly to, you know, like the baby boomers like myself. We're now retirees. The ratio between income earners and retirees now is a lot worse than it used to be back in the 70s. So that's you know, the income earners have to support us, you know, and governments of the day didn't really think ahead too far about the whole baby boom thing. Second D, headwind, is debt. Government debt, household debt, and you know, of course, Gordon trots out a lot of stats, and well, we know a lot of stats too. The U.S. is what, close to $40 trillion in debt. back in Canada here, every month, you and I, the taxpayers, and yeah, I still pay taxes, even though I'm right here retiree. We have to pay $4 billion every single month just to pay the interest on our federal debt. That's horrendous. Even a province like Ontario, it's probably one of the worst. It's got a debt of $500 billion, $500 billion. So, really sad. The third factor, education. Back when I was going to university in the 80s, I paid a grand total of $1,400 Canadian for 2 semesters, a year of university. Some stats came out just the other day from down in the States. These weren't Ivy League universities by any means, but they averaged out $90,000 US per year per student. So it's just much harder to get an education, and if you do get one, you're saddled with horrendous student loans. So it's pretty sad. Fourth headwind, inequality, and you know, lots of stats to back that up, but the one that sticks in my mind that Robert Gordon writes about is back in the 1970s, the average CEO made about 20 times what the average worker made. Nowadays, the average CEO makes 250 times what the average worker makes. So anyways, those are the 4 headwinds. So we got to work at those. Before I go, and Gordon didn't talk about this stuff, but artificial intelligence. So it's still, I guess, an open book on, you know, whether it's going to be a net plus or a net minus. But just a little anecdote. Very first time, well, when ChatGPT came out, the very first question I asked it was, should humanity be optimistic or pessimistic about the future of civilization? And so ChatGPT came up with 4 reasons we should be optimistic and 4 reasons we should be pessimistic. And I won't go into all of them, but one I had a bit of a chuckle over. One reason to be pessimistic, it said artificial or AI automated weaponry. I thought that was kind of ironic, but the other one that it mentioned, which essentially goes back to this whole thing I'm doing with this Changing Maps book and the Velamobile and situation our society's in. It mentions another reason to be pessimistic is the extreme political polarization. So on the next video I will talk about that a bit. Okay, thanks for listening.